Hello and welcome to Dialogue. A major trade deal struck over the weekend in Scotland between the U.S. and the EU is drawing sharp reactions. Well, some are calling it a strategic win for Donald Trump. Critics within Europe argue the agreement is deeply imbalanced. Under the deal, the U.S. will impose a 15% tariff on most European imports, while the EU agrees to major commitments, ramping up a purchase of American energy and boosting investment in the U.S. Meanwhile, in Asia, a high-level U.S. business delegation is visiting China this week, coinciding with a new round of China-U.S. trade talks in Sweden. So what impact will the U.S.-EU deal have on European economies? Will Washington's tariffs unite or divide the EU further? And what should we expect from the ongoing China-U.S. negotiations? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics, Anthony Moretti, Associate Professor from Robert Morris University, Radhika Desai, Visiting Professor from the Department of International Development at the London School of Economics, and Daniel Gros, Director of the Institute for European Policymaking at Bocconi University. Later, I will also be joined by Anna Ashton, founder of Ashton Analytics, and also former Vice President of Government Affairs at the U.S China Business Council. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Radhika, I would start with you. The deal EU reached with the U.S., of course, is a strong reaction, as we said. If you look at the headlines, many people would say that's a capitulation, surrender, the EU chickening out, of Trump. So, what do you make of the deal?
Well, certainly if the headlines announced by both Trump and Ursula von der Leyen are true, then it looks like a capitulation. Definitely. I mean, some people have even said that essentially the EU is prostrating itself before the Trump administration. There is, however, one catch that I'd like to note, which is that we are being told there's a deal. We have been given some highlights, but the details are still to be worked out. We don't know. A lot of key issues are not covered. There hasn't even been a joint statement which says, this is what both parties agree to. So that's one thing. The other thing is that a lot of what the Europeans have promised, for example, we will buy so much worth of energy. I mean, how can the EU ensure that European companies will buy these things? So a lot of the devil is in the detail. But having said that, yes, I would say that, and of course the promise of investment is also just that. It's a promise. It hasn't happened yet. So, but having said that, I would say that this is revealing divides within the European Union when the leaders of France and Germany in particular come out and voice their dissatisfaction with the deal, as well as other countries like Spain. I think that this is going to be very problematic.
Mm-hmm. Very pragmatic. Anthony, sitting in the U.S., how do you look at that? Is that a big win for Trump and his supporters? Like 15% on goods from Europe, but 0% for U.S. exports?
Well, we know what he's going to say. In fact, he's already said it. This is the biggest trade deal of them all. And, I think something that Professor Desai said just a second ago needs to be amplified. And that is, Trump is not one who really cares about the details. He cares about the headline. He cares about being able to walk off the plane or walk off Marine One, the helicopter, and talk to the press for a few seconds and say, look at this great deal I made, and Europe has gotten in line, and I'm proving myself to be right, and all the critics are wrong. And so this is sort of standard practice for what we've seen. The deal with Japan, for example, excuse me, roughly 7 to 10 days ago, a lot of details were left out then, and the interpretation from Washington of the deal and the interpretation from Tokyo of the deal were not aligned in any way, shape, or form. So I think we're going to see the same thing here, but there is no doubt that, at least from Trump's perspective, this again, the words he loves, big, tremendous, awesome, great, massive, he's going to employ all of those at some point. But the reality is that while the few headlines suggest a major win, let's be a little cautious and let's see what actually comes from it.
Bochen, of course, the details, as Desai mentioned, we have to wait and see. And also the enforcement of the deal probably would be problematic. But if you look at the surface, the major content of the deal, many people would say that's a complete surrender of the EU to the US, to Trump. 50% on the European goods, but nothing in return. And the US also, EU also has to promise to make a huge investment and also purchase of US energy as well as military stuff. I mean, the French Prime Minister called it a dark day. The EU had resigned itself into submission. Is that the case?
Well, it seems the whole world is dealing with the old boy who is getting nastier and talking out of the thin air. But so far, I think the Europeans, they have their own considerations and also strategic wisdom. First is to de-escalate the situation and to meet the August 1st deadline. And it's not really only those details that needs to be announced and ironed out, but I really doubt whether it's going to be implementable. One is that the the European Congress can be able to pass through such sort of a deal. There are a number of major deals that the Congress simply veto or put it on the shelf. So I think that's a major possible stumbling block against such sort of deal. Second, they claim that they are all market economies, so such sort of commitment at the political level will have to be implemented by the business community. So, and then the Europeans have already over the last 3 years since the Ukraine war, been purchasing up to 70% of the LNG from the United States. How much more can they really purchase? And how much more can the Americans really supply on that part? And then, the third reason is that there are 27 countries who have very different stake to it. So over the long run, I do not think this is really feasible. Simply, to comply with the this sort of general commitment. So, as my colleagues has mentioned, Trump just want a superficial win, and they gave him the face. And then let's put things afterwards. I think it's not only the Europeans, Japan, the Brits, they all are playing such a sort of game with Trump to give him all the elevation, all the cosmetics. Okay, and then let's do something that is more in conformity with my strategic agenda.
But look, I mean, 15% of tariffs, you cannot fake that. European goods exported to the U.S. at the customs office, they will pay, or the U.S. retailer will pay. Somebody will pay the 15% tariff. That will be real, Baocheng.
Yes. It is first the importers that are really paying all the dues. So you actually bring up a very and even more fundamental question: is that will tariff hurt the exporter or exporting countries, or the importer or the importing countries? So eventually, no one is going to trade at a loss. For those smart business leaders. So therefore, someone is going to pay. So largely, by or historical calculation, the consumers will pay roughly 70% of the entire tariff, and then the importer, the exporter will swallow the rest of it. So the Trump's trick is that okay, now I bring by calculation on annual basis $90 billion to my federal coffer. But who is going to eventually pay the bill? It is really largely the U.S. consumers. So therefore, I think almost all the trading partners at the negotiation or are going to play such a negotiation. They see the situation very clear. But I think the danger The real danger is that where is WTO? So
Good
the
question
U.S.
here.
has committed to WTO by 3.4% at the bonded ceiling of their tariff. The Europeans committed 5.1. So now it's totally rubbed off. And also now, given also the TIP, your trade pact under negotiation for so many years between between the United States and Europe, actually their commitment is all less than 1.5% of tariff. So now the table is completely flipped. So whether the reality can really sustain such a sort of the flipping, I really doubt on that.
Daniel, German Chancellor Merz said this is the best deal at the given situation, but he also said the deal will cause considerable damage to his country, probably to the entire European economies. Is that the case? So a lot of people are expecting damages to the economic growth.
It is certainly true that this is not an ideal deal for Europe and also for Germany. But the circumstances were such that Europe had to choose between two bad outcomes and choose the least bad outcome, at least. That's what many people think here in Europe, because a trade war between the United States and Europe would have cost the United States more, but also Europe more. And since the European economy is weaker, in the end, the European Union had to give in. So we have a deal which is, yes, some damage for Europe, but it is manageable.
But Daniel, is this the way to deal with the big bully on the ground? They started to bully you, and you say, well, let's surrender, to avoid further losses.
The EU, of course, has the delicate position that it also depends on the US for security. So the choice here was to say, okay, we give in on 15% tariffs, but at least we keep the Americans on our side. And this is not just generic security. We have a war going on in Europe, and the war in Ukraine for Europe is really essential. Without the US, it is much more difficult to keep Ukraine in the fight, keep Russia away, and therefore the Ukraine issue for Europe it towers over everything else.
Okay, so Radhika, is the security consideration the EU has to make such a choice? And as I want to ask you, Baocheng mentioned this question, WTO. Do we need to safeguard the basic principles of international trade? I mean, EU, claims they're the second largest economy in the world, after the US. If they give up that easily, who else will defend the WTO rules?
Well, that's very interesting what you say about the WTO. The Europeans have always prided themselves on being, essentially being very rule bound and so on. And of course, internally, the Europeans have to be that as well. But what we've seen in recent years, particularly since the Ukraine conflict began, the most recent phase of it, which is that the Europeans are very happy to make exceptions. So now Germany has loosened, for example, its borrowing limits in order to spend more, etc. So in that sense, I think that Europe is definitely turning rogue vis-a-vis the international economic governance. But having said that, I would like to mention that the Europeans seem not to be decided as to exactly what they should do. The fact is that since the Trump administration has come into office, the Europeans have been making up the shortfall of the American aid to Ukraine. So the Europeans have stepped into the breach. They are supplying Ukraine with both military and non-military aid and so on. So that would signal to me that there's more room for the Europeans to assert their independence. And quite frankly, if the United States is not helping them in what they consider to be this existential fight with Russia, then why kowtow to the Americans? So the mystery remains. I think that the Europeans have given away too much. I mean, there's also the point that this deal is about trade in goods. If you take account of trade in services, Europe and the United States have balanced trade, and the Europeans have not at all mentioned that. In the negotiations, they do not seem to have talked about this. So it seems to me that the leadership of the European Commission, that is Ursula von der Leyen, has taken the bit between her teeth, because Europe is divided now. If the major governments of Europe, France, Germany, Spain, are basically saying they don't like it, plus the right is gaining ground in Europe precisely because of these sorts of deals and the war in Ukraine, the continuation of neoliberal policies, etc. I don't think Europe is going to find itself in a very pretty place. So, as I say, Europe has capitulated, and it does not look very good at all.
Right. Daniel, do you think this will, let's say, okay, what good will come out of this deal? The European Union actually is relying more on the U.S., not only security, but also energy and military equipment. Where is the strategic autonomy?
Now, the key point for Europe is that we are working in Europe to get to do more for our own security. So we are not there yet. There are big plans, for example, in Germany to spend more. So I would say in 2 or 3 years, Europe will have much more strategic autonomy than it has today. But it takes some time to develop that. In terms of military acquisitions from the US, I would not be so concerned. Most of the military expenditure in Europe goes towards European goods, but you just tell Trump, of course, we like to have patriots. They are the best that there are. You have some good airplanes, and they will be bought. But I think on military equipment, this is really an empty promise. On energy, it's very similar, because the United States just doesn't have enough energy to provide Europe with these gigantic amounts that have been promised. The previous Trump administration accepted a similar promise from the previous Commission president, and also it didn't lead to much. But it was a gesture of goodwill. If you have cheap energy, give it to us. We can eat it.
Anthony, obviously, we know that there are different opinions inside the European Union, 27 members. Many people are not happy with that. Do you think the deal will further, unite or divide the EU?
My immediate impression is that it's going to do both, and let me explain why. I think, one, it's going to unite people in thinking Trump is, whatever term will immediately follow. In other words, how come he continues to try to bully us? Why do we continue to give in? It's time to really stand up. But I think once that anger subsides, once each nation begins to consider, okay, what does this actually mean for whether it's Spain, whether it's Germany, whether it's Italy, whatever country you want to talk about, then I think you're going to see those fissures begin to develop, because then you're looking at specific needs, specific opportunities. You can talk about security, and that sort of covers the whole swath of Western Europe. But perhaps other items that are included in this might not necessarily be seen as continent-wide, or at least regionally wide, being necessary. So I think once we get into, okay, how much is this really going to cost? How much are we really expending? What are we purchasing? What are the obligations? Presuming, of course, we ever get to that stage with this deal, because again, we know with Trump, it's very much the deal's done, I can move on to the next thing. If that is what ultimately turns out from this, then perhaps that anger in Europe will subside a little more quickly. But I think we're going to see the fissures once you begin to get at, okay, what does this really mean for my country and my citizens versus the entire Western European topography?
Yeah, we have to wait and see, what will happen after this. Another story, China-U.S., which is also related. China's Vice Premier He Lifeng is meeting U.S. officials in Sweden for a new round of economic and trade talks, the third round this year after meeting in Switzerland and the U.K. So what makes this round any different, and is there more momentum this time around? Anna, please.
Thank you. So I think, what makes this round different, if anything, is that the two sides are establishing better rapport in communicating with each other. There's sort of a rhythm to the meetings now, And I think both sides know that they agree that they don't want the tariffs to snap back. They don't want the super high levels of tariffs that were originally rolled out in April to apply again. So there is a mutual determination to try to find a way to extend the pause on Trump's tariffs.
And not many people asking the question we are seeing after the first two rounds of discussion. What we are seeing is like relaxation of restrictions. For example, Chinese side is resuming the supply of rare earths to the U.S. side. The U.S. side is also lifting some of the restrictions of the export to the Chinese side. Can we say we are having more certainty, or less uncertainty, let's say?
Maybe less uncertainty. I think on the US side, the restrictions that were relaxed so far have been restrictions that the Trump administration itself applied. And on the Chinese side, the restrictions, the promise to accelerate license reviews for rare earths and magnets seems to have been honored. But I know that there are still industry concerns about the speed at which the flows of rare earths and magnets are resuming. So there's pressure on the Trump administration to try to get even more of a commitment from the Chinese side to improve the flow of rare earths. The question is, what will the Trump administration bring to the table? Will they be willing to roll back something else important to Beijing? For instance, what about the export controls that were put in place during the Biden administration, the more fundamental export controls on advanced semiconductor technologies and things like that? Are those things that the Trump administration is going to show any flexibility on? And I think that's the ultimate question right now.
Baocheng, how do you look at this current round of discussion? What's your expectation?
Well, the Geneva and London talk are there to reduce the emotional retaliation, to bring down the triple-digit type of the outrage. And now I think both sides come to the right direction. I do not think there's going to be a very enormous breakthrough, but I think it's more of a focused and targeted approach. As how both sides can really reciprocate each other. So now that there's relaxation of rare earths in return for the relaxation of Nevada's the chips, but whether China is going to bring up more market access to U.S. goods, and in return for further relaxation of the tech control by the United States. And China is willing to buy because the Trump's the three type of the triple templates, the high tariff, then the buy more America, and then invest in America. And so China is not really at a huge difference, because there are many Chinese people who wanted to invest in America, but now the security the consideration is now overhanging many of those the Chinese investment momentum over there. So okay, if you really wanted to solicit Chinese investment, relax those the far-fetched security scrutiny, and if you want to buy more and relax your control, so China has a lot more bargaining chips. And plus, I think I strongly suggest China will also have to defend the multilateralism, because China's commitment is 10% on the average to WTO, with regard to the bonded ceiling of the tariff, and the U.S. commit 3.4. Okay, let's talk from there. Now, another issue is the fentanyl. So now the U.S. has constantly blamed that China is really sending the rampant the fentanyl to the U.S. This is totally ungrounded. So it is really the last mile control of the United States, for the fentanyls or the drug trafficking in that regard. So the slapping by 20% of the fentanyl is totally groundless. So China can easily negotiate with good reason and good evidence for the U.S. to really to remove.
Right, but what is complicating the negotiation seems to be, the U.S. There's a reported intention to include China's purchase of Russian and Iranian oil in the negotiation. Anthony, that will further complicate probably the talks there.
I think it will. Ultimately, I think what we're hearing this morning in this part of the conversation is the two sides have a choice. One is to make it a sort of transactional deal. I get X, you get Y, we shake hands, we walk away. But at the end of the day, nothing is necessarily really decided. Some of the core issues that define the relationship, or at least the struggles in the relationship, are not addressed. The other possibility, again, and this maybe plays into the idea of working on Trump's ego, is to talk about this as a transformational opportunity. A chance to do, as Trump likes to say, to do a deal that is something beyond just, a few million here, a few billion there, you buy this, I relax that. Instead, can the entire fundamental scope of the relationship change? Maybe that's too far-fetched. Maybe that's too optimistic. But I wonder if this is the time for the U.S. to put forward, or for the Chinese to put forward, a really transformational opportunity in this relationship, because there's no question what we've seen over the last 10 or so years doesn't work. It's a lot of growling at each other. It's a few handshakes. There's a sense of, a couple of minutes of calm, and then the anxiety and the anger reappears. So there's a chance here. I'm not sure either side, at least in this phase of the talks, will move to that point. But there is an opportunity to really transform the relationship if, again, the U.S. is willing to move off some of its most stubborn positions.
Right. Anna, we know that there's a trip organized by U.S. China Business Council coming to China this week. They will meet the Chinese side, including senior Chinese officials. So talk more about that. How will the visit, in a sense, may help ease the tensions between the two sides, and what's the purpose here?
Well, I think that, first of all, the U.S. China Business Council has historically regularly conducted these sorts of meetings so that senior business leaders from U.S. multinational corporations can express their desire to remain engaged in the China market, and also communicate about the challenges that create difficulties for remaining engaged in the China market. I think it's a very good sign that this is happening again. The U.S. China Business Council has undergone a change in leadership. We have a new president during his second term, but still, this is the first time that this trip has happened since Trump reassumed office. And it just underscores that there remains an enormous desire on the part of the U.S. business community to engage with China economically. That even though there has been talk of decoupling for the last decade, the amount of decoupling is actually pretty minimal. I think that that's a reason for optimism. And I also think that the timing right after this round of talks is helpful in the sense that it seems that the Trump administration, the White House, is leaning more towards the sort of commercial advice for managing the relationship than the national security hawk advice. And that could encourage them to continue doing that.
Right. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.